The Thompson family Christmas dinner was always held at Robert and Margaret Thompson's estate in the suburbs. A sprawling colonial with more square footage than any two people needed and a dining room that could seat 20 comfortably. This year, like every year, Margaret had insisted on hosting despite being in her 70s and having a housekeeper who did most of the actual work. I'd arrived at 3 o'clock with my husband Daniel, carrying the homemade cranberry sauce I made every year and bracing myself for the inevitable questions about when we were going to have children, buy a bigger house, or generally live up to the Thompson family standards. Daniel's older brother Richard was already there with his wife Susan and their 2 children. Richard was a cardiologist at a private practice in the city, something his parents mentioned approximately every 12 minutes. Susan didn't work, she was a full-time mother, which Margaret praised as the most noble calling a woman could have. Daniel's younger sister Jennifer rounded out the family gathering. She just finished her MBA and landed a job at a consulting firm that paid obscenely well for someone with 0 real-world experience. She wore her success like armor, name-dropping clients and deals at every opportunity. "Elena," Margaret said when she saw me, air-kissing both my cheeks. "How lovely. You're looking well. Still working at the hospital?" "Yes," I said simply, handing her the cranberry sauce. "Such dedication," she said in that tone that made dedication sound like a character flaw. "I don't know how you manage those 12-hour shifts. It must be exhausting." "I manage," I said. Robert emerged from his study where he'd been watching football. He was a retired attorney, tall and imposing even in his 70s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent his career telling other people what to do. "Elena," he said, shaking my hand formally. We'd been family for 8 years and he still shook my hand like I was a colleague. "Daniel treating you well?" "Very well," I said. Good. Drink? We have an excellent Bordeaux that Richard brought. Though I suppose you're on call? Nurses can't drink when they're on call, can they?" "I'm not on call tonight," I said. "And I'm fine with water, thank you." He nodded and returned to the study, already losing interest in the conversation. Daniel squeezed my hand as we hung up our coats. "You okay?" he whispered. "Fine," I said, though we both knew that was a lie. These dinners were always a trial. His family had never quite approved of me, the nurse he'd married instead of another doctor or lawyer or someone from their social circle. What they didn't know, what Daniel's entire family didn't know, was that I wasn't actually a nurse. I was a trauma surgeon, chief of surgery at St. Catherine's Medical Center. And as of 6 months ago, the majority shareholder in the hospital's parent company. But I'd never corrected their assumption. 8 years ago, when Daniel had first introduced me as someone who worked at the hospital, his family had immediately assumed nurse. When I didn't correct them, they built an entire narrative around it. The hardworking nurse wife. The one who wasn't quite at their level professionally but was sweet and dedicated. I'd let them believe it because it was easier than dealing with their reactions. And because, frankly, it told me everything I needed to know about how they valued people. Dinner was at 5. We gathered in the formal dining room around a table set with china that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Margaret had outdone herself. A 20-pound turkey, 3 types of stuffing, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, gravy, rolls, and enough side dishes to feed 30 people instead of 8. I'd been assigned the task of carving the turkey, which I did with practiced precision. Years of surgical training made me very good with a knife. "That's beautiful work, Elena," Margaret said, watching me carve. "You have such steady hands. That must serve you well in nursing." "It does," I said neutrally. Richard launched into a story about a particularly complex cardiac surgery he'd performed last week. His parents listened with rapt attention, asking detailed questions and praising his skill. Susan beamed with pride. "It's moments like these," Robert said when Richard finished, "that remind me why we pushed you into medicine, son. You're saving lives. Making a real difference." "Thank you, Dad," Richard said, clearly pleased. "Jennifer," Margaret said, turning to her daughter, "tell us about that pharmaceutical client you mentioned. The merger you're working on." Jennifer lit up, launching into a detailed explanation of a corporate merger worth $2.8 billion that her firm was facilitating. The family hung on every word. I ate my turkey and said nothing. "Daniel," Robert said once Jennifer had finished, "how's the practice?" "Taking on new cases." Daniel was an environmental lawyer at a mid-sized firm. Solid career, respectable income, nothing spectacular but nothing to be ashamed of either. "We just landed a class action against a chemical company," Daniel said. "Contaminated groundwater affecting about 50 families. It's going to be a long case but important work. Good for you, Robert said approvingly. Using your law degree to help people. That's what matters. Then they turned to me. It was inevitable. The polite inclusion of the least accomplished person at the table. And Elena, Margaret said kindly, how are things at the hospital? Is the nursing shortage still a problem? Staffing is always a challenge, I said carefully. I'm sure it is, she sympathized. You nurses work so hard. 12-hour shifts, dealing with difficult patients, all that physical labor. I don't know how you do it. Someone has to, I said. True, Robert said, cutting into his turkey. Though I've always thought nursing was more of a calling than a career. You do it because you care, not because of the compensation or prestige. Richard nodded. The nurses at my practice are wonderful. So dedicated. But you're right, Dad, it's not really a career track profession. There's not much room for advancement. You're basically doing the same job at 60 as you did at 25. That's not entirely true, I said mildly. There are nurse practitioners, nurse managers, specialized roles. Sure, Richard said dismissively. But you're still fundamentally in a support role. You're helping doctors do their work, not making the actual medical decisions. My grip tightened on my fork, but I kept my expression neutral. Daniel shifted uncomfortably next to me but said nothing. He never said anything during these dinners. Never defended me, never corrected his family's assumptions. We'd fought about it before. His position was that it didn't matter what they thought, that I knew who I was, that engaging would just make things worse. My position was that his silence felt like agreement. Nurses are fine, Robert said, pouring himself more wine. Essential even. But let's be honest, real doctors make the decisions. Nurses follow orders. That's the hierarchy of medicine, and for good reason. You need years of medical school, residency, specialized training to make life and death choices. Nurses don't have that education. Dad, Daniel said quietly, maybe we shouldn't. I'm not being critical, Robert interrupted. I'm stating facts. Elena does important work. We all appreciate nurses. But there's a reason doctors are at the top of the medical hierarchy. They've earned it through education and expertise. I took a long sip of water and said nothing. Margaret patted my hand sympathetically. You should be proud of what you do, dear. Not everyone can handle the physical demands of nursing. It takes a special person. Thank you, I said flatly. Though I do hope you and Daniel are thinking about the future, she continued. You're 35 now. If you want children, you shouldn't wait much longer. And nursing isn't exactly a career you can do while raising a family. Those long shifts, the physical demands, it would be difficult. We're thinking about it, I said, the lie coming easily. Daniel and I had decided years ago we didn't want children. His family didn't know that either. Another truth we'd kept hidden because it was easier than dealing with their disappointment. You could always step back from work, Susan suggested. Once you have children, focus on being a mother. That's what I did, and I've never regretted it. Of course you haven't, Jennifer said, her voice tinged with superiority. But some of us have actual careers we're not willing to sacrifice. Not everyone can afford to give up their income. Elena could afford it, Margaret said. Daniel makes enough to support a family. She wouldn't need to work. They were talking about me like I wasn't sitting right there. I stood. Excuse me. I need to check something in the kitchen. I walked out of the dining room, through the butler's pantry and into Margaret's enormous kitchen. Stood at the sink, gripping the granite counter, breathing slowly. This was the last one. The last Thompson family Christmas dinner I was going to sit through while they dismissed me, patronized me, and reduced my career to a stepping stone on their way to talking about Richard's surgical skills and Jennifer's corporate deals. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the name, James Morrison, Hospital Administrator. I answered. This is Elena. Dr. Martinez, James said, his voice excited. I hope I'm not interrupting your Christmas dinner, but I had to call you immediately. The board meeting just concluded. And? I asked, though I already knew. They approved the expansion. All of it. The $340 million cardiac and trauma wing, the new surgical suites, the research facility, everything. Construction starts in March. I closed my eyes, letting the victory wash over me. I'd been working on this expansion proposal for 18 months. It would double St. Catherine's capacity, bring in cutting-edge technology, and establish us as the premier trauma center in the tri-state area. That's excellent news, James, I said. There's more, he continued. The board also voted to formalize your position. You're officially chief of surgery with full administrative authority over the surgical department. And Dr. Martinez, they confirmed your majority shareholder status. With your recent stock purchase, you now own 52% of the hospital's parent company. You have controlling interest. 52%. I'd been buying shares quietly for 5 years, working with my financial advisors to acquire stock whenever it became available. The previous majority shareholder had died 6 months ago, and his estate had sold me his 23% stake. Combined with what I already owned, it gave me control. Thank you for calling, James, I said. I appreciate you letting me know immediately. Of course. Also, the board wanted me to formally thank you for your vision and leadership. The expansion wouldn't be happening without your advocacy and your financial commitment. My financial commitment. I'd personally guaranteed $80 million of the expansion costs. Not through loans, through direct investment, as I could afford it. We'll discuss details after the holidays, I said. Enjoy your Christmas, James. You too, Dr. Martinez. I hung up and stood in the kitchen thinking. Then I walked back to the dining room. They were still talking when I entered. Richard was explaining the difference between various surgical approaches to coronary artery disease. His parents hung on every word. I sat down at my place next to Daniel. Everything okay? He whispered. Fine, I said. I picked up the carving knife and fork and returned to carving the turkey. The bird was large and I'd only made it about halfway through before the phone call. My phone rang again. I pulled it out, saw James Morrison's name again and made a decision. I need to take this, I said to the table. It's about work. Elena, Margaret said gently, surely it can wait until after dinner? We're in the middle of a family meal. It's important, I said. I answered and immediately put it on speaker, setting the phone on the table next to my plate. Dr. Martinez, James said, his voice filling the dining room. I apologize for calling again, but I wanted to confirm one more detail. The board voted to name the new cardiac wing after you. The Martinez Cardiac and Trauma Center. They felt it was appropriate given your contributions to the hospital and your vision for its future. The table had gone completely silent. That's very generous, James, I said calmly. I'm honored. You've earned it, he said. Your leadership as chief of surgery has transformed St. Catherine's. And your investment in the expansion, $80 million of your own capital. That's extraordinary. Not many physicians have the means or the commitment to make that kind of personal financial investment in their hospital. Margaret's face had gone pale. Robert had stopped mid-bite, his fork frozen in the air. Additionally, James continued, I wanted to confirm the formal paperwork for your majority shareholder position. Our lawyers will have the documents ready next week, but you now own 52% of St. Catherine's parent company. That makes you not just the chief of surgery but the primary owner of the hospital. Congratulations. Richard made a strangled sound. Thank you, James, I said. I look forward to reviewing the paperwork. Enjoy your holiday. You too, Dr. Martinez. And again, congratulations. This is a huge accomplishment. I ended the call and set my phone down carefully. The silence at the table was absolute. I picked up my carving knife and returned to the turkey, slicing with the precision of someone who'd performed thousands of surgeries. Elena, Margaret finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Did he just call you Dr. Martinez? Yes, I said, cutting through the breast meat in perfect, even slices. But you're a nurse, she said, confusion clear in her voice. No, I said calmly, I'm not. I'm a trauma surgeon. I've been a trauma surgeon for 9 years. Before that, I completed my surgical residency at Johns Hopkins. Before that, I graduated from Harvard Medical School. Before that, I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with a degree in biology. Robert's wine glass had stopped halfway to his mouth. You're a doctor? Richard asked, his voice cracking slightly. You're a surgeon? I'm chief of surgery at St. Catherine's Medical Center, I corrected. I oversee a department of 47 surgeons across multiple specialties. I perform approximately 300 surgeries annually, primarily complex trauma cases. My specialty is trauma surgery with a focus on thoracic and vascular repair. But we thought, Susan started. You thought I was a nurse, I finished. I know. I never corrected the assumption. Why not? Jennifer demanded, finding her voice. Why would you let us think you were a nurse when you're actually a surgeon? When you're chief of surgery? Because, I said, setting down the carving knife and looking directly at her. Your assumptions told me everything I needed to know about your values. You met someone who worked at a hospital and immediately assumed nurse. When I didn't correct you, you built an entire narrative around it. The hardworking but not particularly accomplished nurse wife. The one who wasn't quite at your level. That's not fair, Margaret protested weakly. Isn't it? I asked. In 8 years, did anyone ever ask me what I actually did at the hospital? Did anyone inquire about my education, my training, my career path? Or did you just assume nurse and move on? The silence answered my question. 8 Christmases, I continued. 8 years of listening to Richard talk about his cardiac surgeries while you all praised his skill and dedication. 8 years of watching you celebrate Jennifer's career moves and corporate deals. 8 years of polite questions about whether I could handle the physical demands of nursing. Not once did anyone ask what I actually did. Daniel had gone completely still beside me. Tonight, I said, Robert told me that real doctors make decisions. That nurses follow orders. That there's a hierarchy in medicine that exists for good reason. Robert had the decency to look ashamed. He's right, I continued. There is a hierarchy. And I'm at the top of it. As chief of surgery, I make decisions that affect hundreds of patients and dozens of physicians. I decide which surgeries happen, which residents get trained, which protocols get implemented. I run a department with an annual budget of $127 million. Richard was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. But there's something else you should know, I said. 6 months ago, I became the majority shareholder in St. Catherine's parent company. I now own 52% of the hospital, which means I don't just run the surgical department. I control the hospital itself. 52%? Robert repeated faintly. How is that possible? Hospital ownership requires massive capital. Tens of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions, I corrected. My shares are currently valued at approximately $340 million. I've been acquiring them over the past 5 years through earnings from my surgical practice, speaking fees, consulting work, and strategic investments. Margaret had put down her fork, her dinner completely forgotten. The expansion James mentioned, I continued. The $340 million cardiac and trauma wing. That's my project. I've been advocating for it for 18 months. I'm personally investing $80 million in cash to help fund it. And they're naming it after me. The Martinez Cardiac and Trauma Center. $80 million, Jennifer whispered. You have $80 million in cash? I have substantially more than that, I said. But $80 million is what I'm investing in this particular project. The expansion will double our capacity, bring in cutting-edge surgical technology, and establish St. Catherine's as the premier trauma center in the region. You're investing $80 million of your own money in a hospital expansion, Susan said numbly. Yes, I confirmed. Because I believe in the vision. Because it will save lives. And because I can afford it. Daniel finally spoke. Elena. Don't, I said quietly, turning to look at him. Don't say anything right now. He closed his mouth, hurt flashing across his face. You never told us, Margaret said, tears starting to form. Elena, why didn't you tell us? Why let us believe something so completely wrong? Because I wanted to see how long it would take you to ask, I said simply. I wanted to see if anyone would be curious enough about my life to inquire about what I actually did. 8 years and no one ever asked. We should have asked, Robert said quietly. You're right. We should have asked. Yes, I agreed. You should have. But you were too comfortable with your assumptions. The nurse wife who wasn't quite at your level confirmed your worldview. Successful people become doctors or lawyers or corporate executives. Everyone else is support staff. That's not what we thought, Jennifer protested. It's exactly what you thought, I countered. Tonight, you were literally discussing how nursing isn't a career track profession. How there's no room for advancement. How I'd be doing the same job at 60 as I did at 25. You said that about what you thought was my career, Jennifer. You dismissed it completely. She flushed red. And Richard, I continued, turning to him, you said nurses are in a support role. That they help doctors do their work but don't make actual medical decisions. That they don't have the education or expertise. I didn't mean, Richard started. You meant exactly that, I said. You meant that doctors are superior to nurses. That the hierarchy exists because doctors have earned the top position through education and training. Which is particularly ironic because my education is substantially more extensive than yours. He blinked. What? You did your residency at Stanford, I said. Good program. 4 years of cardiac specialty training. I did my residency at Johns Hopkins. 5 years of general surgery followed by a 2-year trauma fellowship. Then I completed an additional year of research fellowship studying advanced vascular repair techniques. My training was longer and more rigorous than yours. But I'm a cardiologist, he protested weakly. And I'm a trauma surgeon who regularly repairs the very vessels and cardiac structures you work with, I said. Plus everything else that comes through the emergency department. Gunshot wounds, stabbings, car accidents, industrial injuries. I handle it all. Your specialty is narrow. Mine is broad. The table had gone silent again. My surgical outcomes are exceptional, I continued. My patient mortality rate is 40% below the national average for trauma surgery. I've published 17 peer-reviewed papers in major medical journals. I lecture at conferences internationally. Last year I was offered the chief of surgery position at Mass General. I turned it down because I was already building something at St. Catherine's. Mass General, Margaret repeated faintly. That's one of the top hospitals in the country. Top 5, I confirmed. They offered me a salary of $850,000 annually plus benefits. I declined because I prefer St. Catherine's. And because as the majority shareholder, my compensation is substantially higher than what Mass General was offering. How much higher? Jennifer asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, that's rude to ask. My base salary as chief of surgery is $680,000, I said. Plus bonuses based on departmental performance that typically add another $200,000. Plus dividends from my majority shareholder position that bring in approximately $4.2 million annually. My total annual income is around $5 million. Dead silence. $5 million, Robert said slowly. You make $5 million a year. Give or take, depending on hospital performance and surgical volume, I said. This year will be slightly higher because we had a particularly profitable quarter in surgical services. Susan had tears running down her face. We've been treating you like you were barely getting by. Like you needed sympathy and support. And all this time I was running a major hospital department and building a healthcare empire, I finished. While you pitied me. I don't understand why Daniel didn't tell us, Margaret said, turning to her son. Daniel, you knew. Why didn't you say anything? Daniel looked miserable. Elena asked me not to. She wanted to see if you'd ever be interested enough to ask. We should have been interested, Robert said. You're our daughter-in-law. We should have wanted to know about your life, your career, your accomplishments. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Can we start over? Margaret asked, her voice pleading. Can we have a conversation where we actually get to know you? The real you. I considered this. Looked around the table at their faces. Shock, shame, embarrassment, and genuine distress. Maybe, I said. But things have to change. The assumptions, the dismissiveness, the hierarchy where Richard's career matters more than mine because you thought mine was nursing. All of that stops. Of course, Robert said quickly. Absolutely. Lena, we're so sorry. We've been terrible to you. You've been condescending, I corrected. You've been dismissive. You've valued your children's accomplishments while dismissing mine. But you weren't terrible. You were just limited. You couldn't see past your own biases. We can do better, Margaret said. We will do better. I hope so, I said. Because I'm tired of these dinners where I sit quietly while you all celebrate each other's successes and pat me on the head for being a dedicated nurse. I'm tired of Daniel's silence when you make assumptions. I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am to make you comfortable. Daniel flinched at that. You own the hospital, Richard said, still processing. You actually own St. Catherine's. I own 52% of the parent company that owns St. Catherine's along with 2 other regional hospitals and 3 urgent care facilities, I corrected. The full healthcare system generates about $800 million in annual revenue. My 52% stake gives me controlling interest in all of it. $800 million in revenue, Jennifer repeated. Your share of that is substantial, I confirmed. The dividends I mentioned, $4.2 million annually, come from that ownership stake. And you're expanding, Susan said. The $340 million wing. Yes. The Martinez Cardiac and Trauma Center will be operational in 3 years. It will include state-of-the-art surgical suites, a dedicated trauma bay, a research facility, and a teaching program for surgical residents. We're also recruiting 3 top cardiothoracic surgeons from various institutions around the country. This is incredible, Richard said, and for once he sounded genuine rather than competitive. Elena, I had no idea. I've been sitting here talking about my little cardiac practice while you're building an entire healthcare system. Your practice isn't little, I said. It's good work. You help people. I'm not trying to diminish what you do. I'm trying to get you to see that what I do matters too. That it always mattered even when you thought I was a nurse. It matters more, Robert said quietly. What you're doing, the leadership, the expansion, the vision, that's extraordinary. Thank you, I said. But it shouldn't have taken this revelation for you to respect me. You should have respected me when you thought I was a nurse. Nurses deserve respect. They do critical work. The fact that you couldn't see my value unless I was a surgeon and a hospital owner says something troubling about your values. He nodded, accepting the criticism. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Can I ask something? Jennifer said quietly. The expansion, the $80 million investment, where did that money come from? Even with your salary and the dividends, that's a massive amount of capital. Strategic investments, I said. I've been investing aggressively for 10 years. Real estate, index funds, private equity and medical technology companies. I also do consulting work for other hospitals on surgical department optimization. That brings in about $300,000 annually. And I've been very disciplined about saving and investing rather than spending on lifestyle inflation. Lifestyle inflation? Margaret asked. Buying expensive things just because I can afford them, I explained. I live modestly relative to my income. Daniel and I have a nice house, but it's not a mansion. I drive a 5-year-old Volvo. I don't wear designer clothes or carry luxury handbags. I invest the difference. That's very wise, Robert said, his attorney's mind appreciating the financial strategy. It's allowed me to build substantial wealth, I said, which I'm now using to expand healthcare access in our community. The new wing will serve thousands of patients who currently have to travel to other cities for specialized cardiac and trauma care. You're changing lives, Susan said softly. Literally saving lives. That's the goal, I said. Medicine isn't about prestige or hierarchy. It's about helping people in their most vulnerable moments. Everything else is just ego. Richard looked chastened. My phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it. My surgical resident letting me know a trauma case had come in but was being handled by the on-call attending. You're still taking calls, Margaret observed. Even on Christmas. I'm always available for my department, I said. Being chief of surgery isn't a 9-to-5 job. If there's a complex case, if a resident needs guidance, if something goes wrong, I'm available. Always. That's a huge responsibility, she said. It is, I agreed. But I chose it. I wanted the responsibility. I wanted the opportunity to shape how surgery is practiced at our hospital, how residents are trained, how patients are cared for. And now you're shaping the entire hospital, Robert said. As the majority shareholder. Yes, I said. Which brings both opportunity and pressure. Every decision I make affects hundreds of employees and thousands of patients. It's not something I take lightly. I imagine not, he said. Daniel finally spoke again. Elena, I'm sorry. For not defending you tonight. For all the times I didn't defend you. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was really just being a coward. I looked at him. My husband of 8 years who'd sat silently through countless dinners while his family dismissed me. Yes, I said simply. You were. He flinched but nodded. I'll do better. I promise. I hope so, I said. Because I'm done sitting silently while our family, makes assumptions. I'm done pretending to be less accomplished to make other people comfortable. If that means these dinners get uncomfortable sometimes, so be it. They should get uncomfortable, Margaret said. We should be challenged. We should be asked to see past our assumptions. Elena, thank you for finally telling us the truth. Even if it took 8 years. You're welcome, I said. The turkey was fully carved now. I'd worked through the entire bird during this conversation, creating perfect slices arranged on the serving platter. Can we eat? Jennifer asked tentatively. Before everything gets completely cold? Yes, I said. Let's eat. We resumed dinner, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of Richard dominating the conversation with stories about his practice, people were asking me questions. About the expansion, about my training, about what it was like to run a surgical department. What's the most complex surgery you've performed? Richard asked, and he sounded genuinely curious rather than competitive. I thought about it. Last month we had a motorcycle accident victim come in. Massive thoracic trauma, ruptured aorta, multiple organ damage. We were in surgery for 14 hours. I had to repair his aorta, remove his spleen, repair his liver, and reconstruct his chest wall. He coded twice on the table. But we got him through it. He went home 3 weeks later. 14 hours, Susan breathed. How do you even stand for 14 hours? You don't think about it during surgery, I said. You're focused on the patient. The physical exhaustion hits afterwards. What drives you? Margaret asked. To take on cases like that, to work those hours, to carry that kind of pressure? I considered the question. Every patient who comes through my or is someone's loved one. Someone's parent or child or partner. They're in the worst moment of their life and I have the skills to help them. How could I not do everything possible to save them? That's beautiful, she said quietly. That's a beautiful way to think about medicine. It's the only way to think about it, I said. The prestige, the salary, the ownership stake. None of that matters in the OR. What matters is the patient on the table and whether I can keep them alive. The rest of dinner passed in genuine conversation. Robert asked about the expansion timeline and the fundraising strategy. Jennifer wanted to know about hospital administration and healthcare policy. Even Susan engaged, asking thoughtful questions about work-life balance and how I managed the stress. Richard was quiet, processing. As we were clearing dishes, he pulled me aside in the kitchen. I need to apologize, he said. Not just for tonight but for 8 years of being dismissive. I should have been curious about what you did. I should have asked questions. I should have seen you as a colleague rather than just my brother's wife. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Can I ask why you specialized in trauma? He said. It's one of the most demanding specialties. Why choose that path? Because trauma surgeons see medicine at its most urgent, I said. There's no time for careful deliberation or second opinions. Someone comes in bleeding out and you have minutes to save their life. It requires quick thinking, technical skill, and the ability to make high-stakes decisions under pressure. I found that challenge irresistible. I could never do it, he admitted. I like cardiology because it's precise, methodical. I can plan procedures, consider options, collaborate with colleagues. Trauma is too unpredictable for me. Different specialties for different personalities, I said. That's what makes medicine work. We need cardiologists and trauma surgeons and oncologists and pediatricians. We all play a role. You're generous to say that after how I've treated you, he said. I'm not being generous, I said. I'm being accurate. Your work matters, Richard. It always has. I just needed you to acknowledge that mine mattered too. It does, he said. Clearly it does. Elena, what you're building at St. Catherine's, that's going to change healthcare in this entire region. That's the goal, I said. We rejoined the family for coffee and dessert. Margaret had made her famous apple pie and we sat around the table talking, really talking, for the first time in 8 years. Can I ask about next steps? Robert said. With the expansion, I mean. What happens now? Construction starts in March, I said. We've already hired the architectural firm and the general contractor. The project should take about 30 months to complete. In the meantime, we're recruiting surgeons, purchasing equipment, developing protocols. By the time the building is ready, we'll have the team and systems in place to operate at full capacity from day one. That's ambitious, he said approvingly. It has to be, I said. We're in a healthcare crisis. Emergency departments are overwhelmed. Patients are waiting hours for care. We need more capacity, better systems, innovative approaches. The expansion is my answer to that crisis. And you're funding it personally, Jennifer said, still awed by the numbers. Partially, I said. I'm investing $80 million. The hospital is contributing $150 million from reserves and operating revenue. We're financing the remaining $110 million through municipal bonds and philanthropic donations. It's a mix of funding sources. You make it sound simple, she said. It's not simple, I said. It's incredibly complex. But it's necessary, so we're making it happen. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Margaret pulled me into a hug. Thank you for telling us the truth, she said. And I'm sorry it took 8 years for us to ask the right questions. Thank you for listening when I finally answered, I said. Robert shook my hand, but this time it felt different. Respectful. I hope you'll tell us more about the expansion as it progresses. I'd genuinely like to know about it. Not as polite conversation but as real interest. I'd appreciate that, I said honestly. In the car on the way home, Daniel was quiet. Are you angry with me? He finally asked. I'm disappointed, I said. But not surprised. I should have spoken up, he said. Years ago. I should have corrected them the first time they called you a nurse. I should have defended you, supported you, made them see you. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Why did you stay quiet for so long? He asked. I thought about it. Because I wanted to see if anyone would care enough to ask. If anyone in your family would be curious enough about my life to inquire about what I actually did. 8 years, Daniel. 8 years and no one ever asked. I should have made them ask, he said. You should have made them see me, I corrected. There's a difference. We drove in silence for a while. What happens now? He asked. Now we see if things actually change, I said. Your family says they'll do better. But words are easy. Following through is harder. And if they don't follow through? Then we have some decisions to make about how much time we spend with people who can't value me unless I'm successful by their definition, I said. He nodded slowly. That's fair. When we got home, I changed into comfortable clothes and sat on our back deck looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was St. Catherine's Medical Center. My hospital, my vision, my life's work. The Martinez Cardiac and Trauma Center would open in 3 years. It would serve thousands of patients. Save countless lives. Transform healthcare delivery in our region. And I'd built it while my in-laws thought I was a nurse who couldn't handle the physical demands of the job. The irony was almost funny. My phone rang. James Morrison again. Dr. Martinez, I apologize for calling so late. But I wanted to let you know, the press release about the expansion just went out. We're already getting media inquiries. The local news wants to do a feature on you and the Martinez Center. How should I handle that? Schedule it, I said. I'll do the interview. Excellent. Also, we're getting calls from donors who want to contribute to the project. The publicity is generating a lot of interest. Good, I said. Forward the serious inquiries to the development office. We can always use additional funding. Will do. And Dr. Martinez? Congratulations again. This is a historic moment for St. Catherine's. Thank you, James. It's a historic moment for all of us. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness for a long time thinking about Christmas dinners and assumptions about family and respect, about the difference between who people think you are and who you actually are. Tomorrow, the local news would run a story about the brilliant trauma surgeon who was expanding St. Catherine's Medical Center with a $340 million investment. They'd interview me about my vision for healthcare, my surgical innovations, my leadership philosophy. And Daniel's family would see it. Would understand finally and fully exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished. Not a nurse. Not support staff. Not someone who needed their pity or their career advice. But a trauma surgeon. Chief of surgery. Majority shareholder. Leader. Visionary. Dr. Elena Martinez, who'd built an empire while they weren't paying attention. I smiled in the darkness. Let them underestimate you, I thought. Let them make assumptions. Then show them the truth. It was the most satisfying kind of success. The kind nobody saw coming.